The conflict between Israel and Palestine by Elias Audy. This year's NHD theme is debate and diplomacy. The topic that I have chosen is the debate between Israel and Palestine and the right for Palestinians to live on their own land. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict has been ignited over the past 74 years. A Jewish homeland idea has been around since Theodor Herzl proposed at the First Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland. At the Congress, Herzl became the first president of the newly created World Zionist Organization, which the Congress established as the political arm of the Jewish people. In 1916, after World War I, the Middle East was divided up by the French and the British after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Britain occupied and ruled over the land of Palestine. In 1917, the British Foreign Minister promised to support a Jewish state in Palestine in what's known as the Balfour Declaration. In 1948, Israel proclaimed independence and claimed to be the original inhabitants of the Palestinian land. In 1949, more than 1.25 million Jews immigrated to Palestine. The Palestinians were not able to defend their land against the newly immigrated Jews and their supporters across the world. All the Jews were united in the goal of taking the land that was rightfully Palestinian land. How Jews immigrating from everywhere except Israel have the right to take over another nation is something that shouldn't be accepted. Millions and millions of Palestinians were kicked out of their homeland and were now refugees. In the debate between Israel and Palestine, Palestine deserves to have their own land back because Palestinians do not have a place that recognizes them as citizens and provides them safety. When the State of Israel was created, a new set of laws called the absentee laws were made, which allowed anyone who was considered an absentee of the State of Israel to have their property confiscated. In the diplomacy of Israel and Palestine, Israel has claimed that the Palestinian land is theirs, which has caused conflict in the Middle East. In the State of Israel, Palestinians do not have the same rights as Israelis and are treated like second-class citizens, even though they have been living there all their lives. This is a failure because Palestinians should be treated equally as the Israelis, and they deserve the same security, equality, and right to a homeland. After the creation of Israel, a new set of laws called the absentee laws were created. They led to loss of incomes, which had led to economic hardship. These laws allowed anyone who is considered an absentee of the State of Israel to have their property confiscated. Examples are land, money, goodwill, or businesses. People were considered absentees if they had citizenship to any of the other Middle Eastern countries. Any confiscated property were given to Jewish immigrants. The absentee laws caused great economic hardship for the Palestinians because their property were their livelihood. Much of the economy was based on agriculture, and that is where most people obtain their income from. So if the land was confiscated, it would be just as if their income was confiscated. Under the British Mandate of Palestine, the Palestinians received many everyday resources. However, after the creation of Israel, these resources were no longer given to the Palestinians. These resources included health facilities, such as clinics and medical professionals, roads, and clean water. The Palestinians would pay a small tax for these resources. Under the creation of Israel, these resources were no longer given to the Palestinians, and, in addition, they had to pay a tax that was even higher than the tax they paid under the British Mandate. This led to loss of income, which led to poverty amongst many Palestinians. One of the major conflicts in the Middle East right now is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Israelis claim that the Palestinian land is rightfully theirs. This conflict in the Middle East is not just in the Palestinian land, but is spread throughout the whole Middle East. Almost every Arab country has gotten involved, and it's a very polarizing topic. Most likely, this conflict is not going to end in the near future because both sides claim the right to the same piece of land, and it's almost impossible to have them negotiate to share it. Originally, Israelis wanted a two-state solution, but the Palestinians didn't agree with this because they didn't feel that it was fair to split a country that was theirs. As the years went on and Israel was occupying more and more of the Palestinian land, and they were getting more resources from the United States, Palestinians were more open to a two-state solution, realizing that they had more to gain now, but it was just too late. Now, Israel wants all the Palestinian land, and they wanted to reclaim it as a Jewish state. The Israelis treat the Palestinians as second-class citizens, and they kick them off their land by force and demolish their houses, and they constantly try to shrink the land available for the Palestinians to live on. The Palestinians are basically prisoners in their own country because they are not Jewish and they do not have an Israeli citizenship. Palestinians in Israel are not offered the same rights as Jewish Israelis. They are not offered basic rights like medical services without waiting in multiple checkpoints just to leave the Palestinian territories. Even though Palestinians were born and lived on their land their entire life, they are still not considered citizens and offered the same rights. However, a person who has no connection to the Palestinian area and claims themselves to be a Jewish person, they will be granted Israeli citizenship and they will be housed and will receive money from the Israeli government. This is extremely not fair for the Palestinians, whose ancestors have lived on this land for thousands of years, and they still have no rights, and they have to live in horrible conditions. One of the few short-term successes of Israel in Palestine was in 1993. President Clinton proposed a peace treaty called the Oslo Accords. It was between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Israel. The treaty took place in Oslo, Norway, signed by Mahmoud Abbas from the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Foreign Minister Shimon Peres from Israel. This treaty proposed for a two-state solution. Unfortunately, the peace treaty wasn't supported and well known in Israel. Success between Israel and Palestine might come through the acceptance of each other in a democratic, non-religious state shared by everybody with equal human rights for all. In conclusion, Israel has claimed that they should control and own the land that belongs to the Palestinians. Palestinians are not treated equally in Israel, and Israel should not be known as the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel is far from democracy, and they relate more to Russia and China, which are not democratic countries. Their country is built off of stolen land and stolen resources. If Israel wanted to be respected more in the Middle East by their neighboring countries, they should treat the Palestinians better and supply them with the basic needs of life. They should let the citizens in the Gaza Strip have permission to fish in the Mediterranean Sea. They should be able to have their own airport, and they should at least have basic rights in Israel.
على عهدي على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني